Hello, everybody. Welcome to another fabulous webinar here at EHN Canada. My name is Jonathan, and I'm pleased to welcome you to today's webinar entitled Speaking with Confidence, Tackling Anxiety, Thriving Under Pressure. I'm so excited for this one. For those of you who are longstanding attendees of our webinars, welcome back. And for those of you who are new to EHN Canada, we are a leading nationwide network of treatment centers for addiction, trauma, and mental health. We offer inpatient services with centers coast to coast, as well as intensive outpatient and virtual options. For more information, you can visit our website at ehncanada.com. Everyone is on mute and cameras are turned off for today's webinar. We'd like for you to use the Q&A box to submit your questions for our speakers throughout the session. Sometimes the Q&A doesn't work. Feel free to use the chat as well. I will be personally keeping track to make sure everybody's questions are answered. We will be sending a follow-up email in the next week that will contain a link to the recording of today's session and your CEU certificate. To stay updated on our future webinars and newsletters, we invite you to opt into our mailing list by filling out the form that will be linked in the Q&A chat in just a short moment. Our speakers and I are all located in Toronto, which is on the traditional territory of several nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples. It is covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississaugas of the Credit. If you are new to this work and want to find out whose land you are on or grew up on, please visit www.native-land.ca. And now to the feature event. Allow me to introduce you to today's speakers. Dr. Amanda Taube is an industrial organizational psychologist based in Toronto and the founder of a clinic offering career-focused psychological services. In her practice, Dr. Taube and her dedicated team provide both individual and group support and therapy to clients facing workplace challenges such as imposter syndrome, public speaking anxiety, which we'll hear more about today, job stress, burnout, and career transitions. She has created a 10-week public speaking group that has helped over 100 professionals, aimed at helping them feel more confident and less fearful of speaking. Dr. Taube holds a master's and PhD in industrial organizational psychology from the University of Guelph. And our second speaker, Dr. Megan Yarmy, is an insightful clinician, researcher, and educator with over 20 years of experience in higher education and the private sector. Her background includes clinical treatment and health promotion, research and evaluation, and various leadership capacities within the mental health and behavioral health and well-being sector. In addition to a PhD in social psychology from York University, Megan's academic credentials include an MSW in clinical social work from Wilfrid Laurier, a Master of Arts in Community Psychology from the University of Toronto, and a Bachelor of Arts in Psychology from the University of Guelph. What an amazing group of speakers. Now, without further ado, I'll hand over the stage to Dr. Taube and Dr. Yarmy.
Thank you, Jonathan. And actually, that just reminds me, if we can go ahead and launch that poll. I'm not sure if it's launched yet or not. Jonathan, is it launched?
I'm going to do that right now.
Okay, amazing, because we have some questions as well, so we can get to know all of you better here today. So hello, everyone. My name is Amanda, and we are so excited to be with you here today and really grateful that you have joined us and grateful for EHN Canada for having us back here a second time. So today's topic is speaking with confidence and specifically tackling anxiety and thriving under pressure. So what we are talking about today is tackling specifically public speaking anxiety. So learning to manage the pressure with public speaking, both before and during public speaking situations. I think that most of us here can think of a time when we have felt pressure with public speaking. For some of us here today as well, we can also think of a time when maybe that we have buckled under pressure. So I invite you to close your eyes and think back to a time when you felt pressure. And my question for you is, what did the pressure feel like? How would you describe that pressure? How did it feel in your mind? How did it feel in your body? How did it affect you as a speaker? So you're welcome to open your eyes when you're ready. And I'd love to hear from those of you who could think of a time in the chat box. If you want to share with me, what did the pressure feel like to you? How would you describe again how it felt in your body and in your mind? So keep an eye on the chat box here. And while I'm waiting for some of your answers to trickle in, I wanted to share with you that I can also think of a time when I buckled under pressure with public speaking. And I can recall the situation as if it happened yesterday, although it was probably about 7 years ago already. And so I think that there's many of us who are here today who knows what it feels like to buckle under pressure. And our goal here today with you is to really start to help you build your self-awareness around public speaking anxiety, around the causes of it, common blind spots, what are some things that we can actually do about it in order for you to start to build your own public speaking toolkit. Because I really think that it's one of the best things that we can do to really learn how to manage pressure. Is to start to build a toolkit of things that you can control. So I'm not sure if there's any answers coming to the chat box yet, because for some reason it's not reloading for me. Megan, do you see any answers coming in? Can you read some of them for me?
Yeah, frozen and paralyzed. Now the full question is to be available soon. So tightness in my chest, faster heart rate, and can't get a full breath. Heart rising, as well as heat to my face. And warm, all the things that could go wrong.
Yeah, great. Thank you for sharing these. What's really interesting actually is that a lot of you, I mean, I did ask you what it feels like in your body, but I also asked you what it feels like in your mind. And a lot of you are talking about the physiological sensations. So I also want you to start to think about, how does it affect my mind? Are my thoughts in a certain place? Are my thoughts racing? How are my thoughts also affecting me in the moment? But thank you for those of you who have shared in the chat box already. As you can see, we are all in good company today. Most of us know what, again, pressure feels like. So a couple of disclosures before we move forward. The first one is that this webinar is intended for educational and informational purposes only. So it is not meant to be a substitute for professional psychological advice, diagnosis, or treatment. So Megan and I have a few more questions because we want to learn, how do you feel about speaking? And so Jonathan has already launched these polling questions for us. And so I'm going to read each of the questions, and then Jonathan is going to share the answers from the poll with each of these as we go along. Okay, Jonathan? So I'm going to need you back online for this. Okay?
Yep, I'm here with the poll ready.
You're ready? Love it. Okay. So the first question that we have for you is, rate to what extent that you enjoy public speaking. So we're defining public speaking as speaking to a group of people. It doesn't necessarily mean that you're on stage in front of like 100 people. It could be a group of 3 people even. So our question for you, first of all, is rate to what extent that you enjoy public speaking. And the answer options are: 1, there's any other place I'd rather be. So in other words, you do not enjoy it. Secondly, it's possible for me to enjoy it, but it's rare. 3, it's sometimes enjoyable. 4 is it's often enjoyable. So let's say 75% of the time that you enjoy it. And 5, there's no other place I'd rather be because I love public speaking so much. So scale 1 to 5. Jonathan, do you mind sharing the polling answers when you have a second?
Yeah, absolutely. So 30% of our respondents said there's any place I'd rather be, that there's so much dread. 28% said it's possible for me to enjoy it, but it's rare. 25% said 50-50, sometimes enjoyable. 15% said often enjoyable, and only 2% said there's no place I'd rather be. I'm very comfortable.
Okay, this is great. Thank you for sharing your answers. As we can see, with regards to the first 2 options here, over 50% of you do not enjoy it for the most part, right? So it's like, if you do enjoy it, it's very rare. So that's helpful for us to know. Our second question, Jonathan, is, do you have a pre-speaking warm-up routine that you do before public speaking? So this could be something that you do, such as a vocal warm-up, to prepare your mind and body for a presentation. So here we just have a yes or no question for you. So we'd like to hear your answer for this one as well.
So 15% of people, only 15% said yes, they have a warm-up routine that they do before public speaking, with 85% saying no, they don't have a public speaking warm-up routine.
Yay. Well, this is great news, because our hope is that Starting today, you're going to start to change that. So starting today, hopefully you'll start to build your own kind of warm-up routine that you can do and toolkit that you can do to help prepare your mind and your body for public speaking. Okay, so that's great. And then we have a final question for you, which is, please describe your current relationship to the fear of public speaking. And the response options for this one are, it is very debilitating and hard for me to manage. It is very challenging for me and difficult to manage at times. 3 is it causes me angst, but manageable mostly. 2 is it causes me to feel comfortable at times, but it is almost always manageable. And 1, it really isn't a fear of mine at this time or anymore.
So we have 14% of respondents, and by the way, 148 responses, saying that it's very debilitating and hard for them to manage. 30% said it's very challenging for me and difficult to manage at times. 31% said it causes me angst but manageable mostly. 22% of respondents says it causes me to feel uncomfortable at times, but it is almost always manageable. And only 3% said, 1, it really isn't a fear of mine at this time or anymore.
I'm
Thanks for
guessing
responding, everyone.
yeah, thank you. That's a great turnout. I'm guessing that the 3% were also the same people that said that they enjoyed it, likely as part of question number 1 as well. So, but it's really helpful to, again, see the distribution of responses here, because it is estimated that roughly 75 to 85% of the population experiences public speaking anxiety. And as many of you might know, it is the number 1 fear that people have. And I think that our results today, through going through these 3 polling questions, really really shares with you that this is really, in fact, a common fear that people have. And a lot of people don't always enjoy it. And sometimes it's really hard for them to manage it as well. So thank you for sharing that, Jonathan. And again, thank you to all of you who responded to our polling question here. So Jonathan already shared with you about us earlier. So we're just going to add a little bit more color to those bios. So as Jonathan mentioned, I am an organizational psychologist. I am the founder of a group practice based here in Toronto. I'm also a mom of 3 young girls. The reason why I'm here is because I am deeply passionate about public speaking anxiety. So I started studying job interview anxiety in graduate school for 5.5 years, which naturally now has just like dovetailed into me focusing on public speaking anxiety. And so that's actually one of the reasons why I even started my group practice in the first place, is because I really wanted to specifically help people with managing this fear so that they can speak when they want to at work, and that they can share their passions and share their gifts with the world. So one of my proudest and biggest achievements to date is, as Jonathan mentioned, that I have designed a public speaking anxiety group about 2 years ago, and have had 14 groups go through my 10-week group during that time. And it's such a fulfilling process for me to watch how people learn to change their relationship to this fear. So it's not that, like, for example, people in my groups may never like get nervous anymore. I still get nervous with it, but it's just that they don't have experienced the fear in the same way. And that's really what my goal is to help people learn to manage it, which you're going to hear a lot about that today. So I'll turn over the floor to Megan to share a little bit about herself as well.
Hi, everybody. I'm Megan, and I'm really happy to be here today with you to dive into a topic that's both professionally and personally meaningful. That's understanding and managing anxiety. So in my work as a practitioner, or as an academic instructor, or as a group facilitator, I've seen firsthand how anxiety can be a barrier to success, but also can be a signal for growth when approached with the right tools. I've had the opportunity to run several groups on anxiety when I was working at the University of Waterloo, and it was one of the most popular groups, running groups every term with great success. So I know firsthand that we can build the skills and the tools to start managing it. When I first started teaching university students, when I graduated from my PhD in the early 2000s, I struggled with anxiety as well, and a little bit of fear of judgment. So even today, after having taught about 20 university classes to university students in psychology, and these classes would range from, say, 10 students up to 600 students, I still get butterflies from time to time, and sometimes a little bit of that performance anxiety that can come up. The difference is that today I have a toolkit to help me better manage those anxieties and the bumps and the nervousness. And through practice, I've built more confidence. So with time, and the hope today is that we're going to help to share some evidence-based strategies and tools that help me and help shift your feelings of nervousness and stuck to feeling more empowered.
Okay, wonderful. Thanks for sharing, Megan.
Yeah.
Sorry, at the tech support, I'm just going to hop in here quickly. Megan, if you want to turn your camera on and off, I think it got frozen a little bit.
Okay.
I was noticing that too. Yeah, so I wasn't sure if it was just my computer.
How's
We got
that?
some.
Okay,
Can you see me now?
it's still frozen.
I'm going to try something too. 1 second.
Okay.
Should I move
Sorry
on,
for
Jonathan,
both.
while you're doing that?
Yep, I'll try and sort that out, but Megan, we can hear you, so keep going.
Okay. Okay, great.
Alrighty, so I'm going to continue on by telling you a little bit more about our practice as well. So we are a boutique practice of 4 practitioners, and we deliver what we refer to as career-focused psychological services to residents of Ontario and Nova Scotia. And so what that basically means is that we help people with self-confidence more generally. We help people with public speaking self-confidence. We help people with workplace stress. There could be also workplace bullying. It could be career counseling. There's many different kinds of parts to the scope of our practice. So we offer both individual and group level therapy services virtually across the province. And our hope is that we can also offer more of these services across Canada at a later time. And the other thing that we also do is that we offer workshops to organizations. And I think something that's really exciting for me is that we're hearing from a lot more organizations that are wanting to help their employees manage this pressure. It's one thing to have a speaking coach come to an organization to share with people how to hold your hands, how to make your introduction as far as, like, let's say a presentation. It's a whole other thing to really help people really manage the pressure and to manage the anxiety aspect of public speaking. So it's really exciting to us that more organizations are interested in tackling and taking on this topic.
Okay. So I'm not sure if everyone can see me or not, but I am still here. So I'm going to walk us through a couple of slides. So our objectives for today, our hope for today is that you walk away at the end of the presentation with some practical tools to manage fear, build confidence, and apply these strategies in real life situations. To accomplish this, we're going to focus on 4 key areas. So first, we're going to understand the causes of public speaking and why even the best speakers feel nervous at times and why that's normal. Secondly, we're going to help you to understand and build confidence. This includes how preparation, mindset, and practice transforms fear into confidence. Think of it like a muscle. The more you use it, the stronger it gets. Thirdly, we're going to encourage you to create your own personalized toolkit, like Amanda has already mentioned. And hopefully these are going to be with some new techniques that you learned here today. And finally, we're going to discuss how to shift your perspective, where you start focusing on serving your audience, not yourself, and remembering that it's okay to embrace imperfection and to reframe nerves as excitement. We hope you learn that public speaking is a skill that you can develop. With the right tools, you can manage anxiety, build confidence, and deliver powerful presentations. Next slide. Right. So as Amanda has mentioned, public speaking anxiety is a common fear of speaking in front of others that can manifest in different ways. And this includes anticipation, or what you might call the what if thoughts that can cause us to get stuck in a spin cycle, which impacts potentially our sleep, our focus, and imagining worst case scenarios. Nervousness, fear of judgment, work-related stress, such as the fear of making pitches, attending meetings, or giving presentations. Sometimes we might feel panic-like symptoms, so that's the somatic or physiological experience. So rapid heartbeat, sweating, shortness of breath, maybe a tense jaw, butterflies in the stomach. And then lastly, social anxiety. So it's important to note that there is a connection to the DSM-5 in that public speaking can be a subtype of social anxiety disorder or performance anxiety. Next slide, please. For most of us, we've likely experienced 1 or 2 or more of these consequences of public speaking anxiety. So take a moment to think about which of these come up for you. Are you someone who uses verbal fillers to buy time for yourself because your mind's racing when you're nervous? Do you avoid taking opportunities to lead? Do you sidestep opportunities to showcase your skills? Do you dread the question and answer period following a presentation? These are all normal reactions to discomfort, fret, and worry, and in a few slides, we'll provide you with some effective strategies to manage them. Next slide. So we all know that anxiety in high-pressure situations like job interviews and public speaking can potentially negatively impact performance by reducing our confidence, working memory, and delivery, even when someone is highly skilled. So recent research on public speaking performance, as rated by others, has found that job interview anxiety is negatively correlated with interview performance. What does this mean? It means that as job interview anxiety increases, interview performance tends to decrease. The correlation coefficient of negative 0.20 indicates a small but moderate negative relationship, meaning anxiety has a measurable but not overwhelming impact on performance. Higher anxiety is generally linked to lower interview success. Secondly, the research also indicates that those with public speaking anxiety tend to score about 15 to 20% lower on objective measures of speech performance. So in a study by Brody and Jones, that's mentioned on the slide, objective measures of speech performance included speech duration. So that's the length of the time the participant was able to speak during the presentation, and speech quality ratings. So these would include evaluations of the speech's effectiveness, their clarity, and their overall delivery. So this finding comes from meta-analysis of over 5,000 participants, making it a really robust and reliable result. Thirdly, research indicates that public speaking anxiety is associated with a 25% reduction in working memory capacity, which means that anxiety can make it harder to concentrate, recall information, or think on your feet. This is because the interaction between cognitive interference, and that's the difficulty concentrating, and our physiological arousal, things like increased heart rate, are key mechanisms linking anxiety to poor performance. Now, having said all that, it's important to note that interview anxiety doesn't predict later job performance very well, right? So having said that, again, it's really important that we want to put our best selves forward in a presentation. So it's key to learning how to find our sweet spot on the arousal continuum. And as we move forward, Amanda and I will give you some tools for that. Next slide.
So there are 5 dimensions of public speaking anxiety, and these are taken from McCarthy and Goffin's work on job interview anxiety, but these can also be applied to when we're talking about public speaking anxiety. And so again, there are 5 dimensions, and I'm going to review them here next with you. And what I want you to do is to ask yourself, am I high, moderate, or low on each of these 5 dimensions? So appearance anxiety is concerns about your appearance when, for example, you're presenting. So it might be things such as worrying about whether you have dressed appropriately, or it might be whether you're considered physically attractive to your audience. So I want you to ask yourself, am I high, moderate, or low on appearance anxiety? The second one is communication anxiety, and communication anxiety would be worries or concerns about having to verbally express yourself. So if you're concerned about, for example, forgetting what you want to say or having a blank out moment, that would be an example of communication anxiety. And again, I want you to ask yourself, am I high, moderate, or low in that one? The next one is social anxiety. And social anxiety is concerns around leaving a lasting positive impression with your audience. So social anxiety, for example, would be worrying about whether your audience actually likes you or not. So again, I want you to ask yourself, am I high, moderate, or low? The fourth one is performance anxiety. And performance anxiety is concerns around actually having to deliver a solid performance. So for example, people who tend to score higher on performance anxiety tend to be concerned about doing a good job or how they compare to their peers or other colleagues. And then the fifth one is behavioral anxiety. And this one is actually, many of you were talking about behavioral anxiety earlier in the chat box, which was really about how bothersome are the physiological responses that you have with public speaking anxiety. So when you think about experiencing anxiety and pressure, and you think about the fight or flight response that you have, how bothersome are those types of reactions and responses that you have in the body? So again, I'm hoping now that you've asked yourself across these 5 dimensions, am I high, moderate, or low on each of these? to hopefully help you start to paint a picture for how you personally experience public speaking anxiety. A fun fact is that typically, even in the research and with our clients as well, that we find that the two that rate the highest of these 5 dimensions for people would be communication and performance anxiety. So we have developed a tool to help individuals unpack the fear of public speaking, to help them start to paint a picture again for how do they personally experience it. So what we're going to do next with you is we're going to share with you basically some of the observations that we see across these different 7 boxes under this tool here. And so I also want you to ask yourself, if you're someone who is joining here today as someone who experiences public speaking anxiety, I want you to ask yourself, maybe even like ask yourself some of these questions as we're going through, just to really help you kind of think through them as we're going along. So the first one here is, what am I really afraid of? So we ask all of our clients this question, like, what is it with public speaking that you're really afraid of? And I actually think that most of you can guess what the answer is, and it is a J word. And I'm curious if someone can put it in the chat box for me. What is it that you think that people are really afraid of with respect to public speaking? What is the word? Judgment. Look at you guys. So that is correct. That what most people are really afraid of is being viewed as incompetent. And so people have concerns over being judged and specifically not meeting other people's expectations. So the next row here are a number of components of anxiety that we're going to be looking at. So one of the first ones here is thoughts. And what is really common for people is that when they're feeling anxious is to be experiencing a lot of negative self-thoughts that are highly distracting for them in the moment. So examples of this would be if I'm speaking to you right now and just saying, oh gosh, I just stumbled on a word. What did I say on the last slide? Oh gosh, I'm sounding so stupid right now. These are examples of negative self-thoughts that people have while speaking that are highly disruptive for them and ultimately impact their ability to be present with an audience. The second one here is physiological. So again, many of you talked about this in the opening question that I had for you when I asked you, what does pressure feel like? And so when we're looking at the physiological sensations and symptoms that people experience, what we find is that the presentation is quite different across folks. And so, but there is one unifying symptom that we find across 95% of our clients. So any ideas in the chat box for me again? What is the physiological sensation or symptom that you think most of our clients experience with public speaking anxiety? Shaking. Okay, I see it. Heart rate. That's right. So most people who experience public speaking anxiety, again, this may not be everybody, but most people will have an elevated heart rate that they find really difficult to manage. So for some people, the elevated heart rate can also affect their shortness of breath or the rhythm of their breath and can really affect their ability to speak. And they often will find that they're speaking quickly because they're having like a rapid, shallow breath in addition to their heart racing while speaking. The third category here might be my favorite one. And this one is really about looking at the behavioral effects that public speaking anxiety has on people's productivity, their well-being, and their lives at home. So as Megan touched on earlier, it is not unusual for people with public speaking anxiety to lose a lot of sleep, the week before a presentation, the days before, and certainly the night before. What we also see is a lot of individuals that will struggle to keep up with their everyday other work tasks that they have to do because they're so fixated on the presentation and getting so many run-throughs done that their other job tasks will often suffer. And then also can even affect individuals' life outside of work. So for a lot of people, they will often report that they're more irritable with their partners and with their kids and with other people that are around them because they're really feeling a lot of stress is what we're seeing. And finally here with the emotion part is that the fear of public speaking is more about our ability to tolerate unpleasant emotions more so than it really is about speaking itself. So you might be thinking, what does that exactly mean? What I mean by that is that most people at the end of the day are really afraid of what we say, fearing the fear itself. So they are really afraid of feeling, for example, embarrassed or disappointed or feeling shame or vulnerability following a poor presentation, more so than they are actually even about public speaking itself. So for a lot of people, this is usually a light bulb moment to be like, oh my gosh, like this is really what is part of the origin of what's happening here, is that people have there's certain emotions that are hard for us. And for many of us here, maybe embarrassment is a really hard emotion. And because of that, it often, it makes public speaking a situation for people that they experience a high level of vulnerability. So finally, the 5 public speaking dimensions are here as well. And we already talked about those on the last slide, so I won't go into those further. And then finally, situational triggers. So with public speaking anxiety, what's also really important, which we'll talk about, is that we really want to uncover people's 10 out of 10 feared public speaking situation. So specifically, when we're looking at an exposure plan, we really need to help people come up with a list of public speaking situations so that we actually help you go out and achieve those situations and to learn to actually manage that pressure. So there are 5 hard truths when we're talking about public speaking anxiety that I want to speak about next. So the first one here, I don't think will come as a surprise to any of you. And that is that we live in a world where we care about what other people think about us. So it has been said that the fear of people's opinions, also referred to as FOPO, is a hidden epidemic and is the single greatest limiter and predictor of human potential. So really important when we're thinking about, again, you guys all mentioned judgment. That was one that many of you said in the chat box here. So judgment is a big one that we feel. And part of the reason for that, again, is because we live in this world where we care about what other people think about us. Some of you may have heard of Mel Robbins' Let Them book that has come out recently. And that is kind of this whole idea is like, let other people think what they want, because it really is such a self-sabotaging problem that we have, is when we're so focused on what other people think about us. Secondly, is that we consider speaking a performance-based scenario. So for a lot of us, speaking can feel like a tap dance, and that is a problem because we're making public speaking about us, when what we should be doing is really we're making it about the information that we want to deliver to our audience, about what are the core messages that you want your audience to take away from your presentation. Thirdly, we avoid what we are scared of. So this is also just human tendency, human behavior, which is that we avoid things that we don't like. The problem is that when we avoid things that we are afraid of, what happens to fear? Anyone want to guess in the chat box? What happens to fear? The more that we avoid a fear, what happens to the fear? So the fear grows stronger is what happens for people. When we tend to avoid public speaking, it only grows stronger, okay? Fourthly, we assume that we should be calm. So many of us enter into public speaking situations thinking like, I should be calm, but I'm not. So we're asking ourselves, what's wrong with me? I'm not calm, but I should be calm. When in fact, I'll tell you something, the most seasoned speakers in the world get nervous. So they're not even expecting themselves to be calm. So something for you to already think about is, what are my views on expecting myself to maintain a certain level of calmness with public speaking? And finally, we have created a stigma, I think is one of my favorite things to also share with audiences. And I think the reason for that is because a lot of us see showing signs of being nervous as a weakness. And because of that, people experience a lot of shame with it. So I think that we have a real opportunity for any organizations that are here, any people that are here, like leaders of teams. I really want you to think about today. One of my challenges for you, if that is you, is I want you to think about a few takeaways from today's webinar that you can go back and share with your teams. As we saw in the beginning with the polling questions, we see how common this fear is. And the answers in the polling questions certainly is in line with what the research shows, which is 75 to 85% of people likely struggle with this, which means that there is a good chance that there are people on your team that are experiencing public speaking anxiety. So as a leader, if that is you or anyone, honestly, who is here, I really encourage you to go back to your teams and share something that you've learned today. Maybe it's a key resource, maybe it's a tip, maybe it's the 5 public speaking dimensions we've already talked about here. Or maybe the other thing you also share is your own lived and learned experiences with public speaking anxiety. So 4 common causes we're going to speak to next. So these 4 common causes are what I refer to as like individual level predictors of public speaking anxiety. And some of you can probably guess what those common causes would be here. So the first one is core beliefs. So I often say that public speaking anxiety is a perfect storm of having a number of negative core self-beliefs about our ability and about what we also believe that the audience expects of us. So I already kind of spoke to this one a little bit earlier, but typically what we see are many people that think that I'm not very good at public speaking, but my audience is expecting me to perform at this standard or at this level. And as if anyone's looking at my video here, we'll see that this is a discrepancy. So we've created a deficit saying like there is a gap now. And for a lot of us with public speaking, the other core belief is that public speaking is a valued skill. It's a really important asset. It is required for job or career prospects. So for a lot of us, that only creates extra pressure. Secondly, I would say that the greatest cause of public speaking anxiety would be this one here, which is probably no surprise, is having a previous negative experience with it. You know, one of the things I often say too is that it only takes one time to get spooked. It only takes one time to form a negative association of I had an opportunity with public speaking, or I had a presentation. I didn't feel good about it. I didn't feel safe. I didn't like how I felt in there. And it's enough to have only one experience for us to form this association of I don't enjoy public speaking. So we even have a number of clients of ours that have actually been confident public speakers their entire lives until one time they have one speaking opportunity that just didn't go well. So again, it often only takes one time for people to get spooked. Thirdly, is that some of us are very sensitive to sensations in the body. So for a lot of us who especially tend to report higher levels of this, is that we are more bothered by the physiological changes in the body. So the bodily symptoms, the bodily changes is something that is bothersome for a lot of people who experience public speaking anxiety, which many of you spoke about a few times today already. And then finally, that the word judgment coming up again, is that people with higher levels of this report higher levels of fears of judgment. So fear of negative evaluation, fear of losing control within the body. This could be a fear of failure, fear of having power. There are so many dominant fears here when it comes to public speaking anxiety that specifically relate to the judgments that we're so afraid of in terms of what other people think about us. As I've already been talking about, I think today, so hopefully this is one core takeaway for you, is that there's one difference between people with higher levels of public speaking anxiety and those with lower levels of it. And it's this core difference. It's really that people, so again, when I talked about those seasoned speakers earlier, so people who are either seasoned with this or who report lower levels of public speaking anxiety, they expect the butterflies. They expect the stress. They expect their fight or flight response to kick in. And so because they expect it, they're not judging themselves for having that experience when it arrives at the door. Whereas people with higher levels of it, they tend to judge those sensations a lot more harshly. Like, again, I shouldn't be having this problem right now. I should be calm. What is happening to me? And so in essence, we have judged this internal kind of sensations or these sensations that we're having. So one of the things that I think is really important to think about then is, where is your current level of acceptance, to check in on that acceptance. What is your current level of acceptance with the physiological side effects of public speaking? Something I think that is really important to think about too is this word overcome versus override. So I think a lot of times, we see a lot of TikTok videos that are like, overcome public speaking or public speaking anxiety with this one strategy. And believe me, I've had many clients tell me that they've tried all the TikTok trends. And the one thing I think that's really important to think about instead of that is like that we don't need to actually eliminate this fear, because the word overcome to me means that we're eliminating something. What we need to think about instead is to override the fear, is to learn to manage it, is to learn to say that, you know what, I can do this even if I'm nervous, that I don't have to extinguish this fear fully. So rather than it being about being fearless, rather, I think it should be about learning to fear less. Because again, the more that we tell ourselves that we need to eliminate this fear, the more that we reinforce negative narratives with it. And again, the negative narrative typically is that I shouldn't be having this bodily response right now. What is wrong with me? So I also want you to think about it that if we're trying to fear less, and if we think about sometimes public speaking anxiety as feeling like a big flame, is that we're trying to shrink and shrink and shrink and shrink the flame to a point where just the pilot light is on.
Okay. So now that you know that public speaking anxiety is what it is, we're going to focus on 3 different approaches to managing fear and building confidence. We invite you to personally engage with the material and write down any tips or takeaways for yourself. Next slide. So, cognitive appraisal is a strategy that involves reframing how you think about a situation to change its emotional impact, helping you manage stress and anxiety more effectively. It starts with self-awareness. We want you to start to pay attention and notice our thoughts and physical sensations when we feel anxious. This is the first step to changing how you respond to fear. Pause and ask yourself, what am I feeling? And what am I telling myself about the situation? Next, we learn to detach from our thoughts and practice mindfulness. By detaching, we learn to observe our thoughts and feelings like a neutral observer rather than being the judge. Detaching helps you see the thoughts are just thoughts. They don't define you or predict the future. Take a moment and ask yourself some key questions and try to be curious about what's going on in this moment. Question number 1, is this performance energy or performance anxiety? Do we need to label the sensation as anxiety? Can we say to ourselves, my racing heart means I'm energized and ready to speak, instead of I'm way too nervous to do this? Question number 2, ask yourself, am I experiencing symptoms or are these just sensations? Can we step back, be non-judgmental, and be with the sensations rather than medicalizing them as symptoms, which implies that something's wrong? Now, the next question, question 3, is this a challenge or a threat? Can we shift our mindset from seeing the situation as a threat to viewing it as a challenge that you can handle? Can you see it as an opportunity to grow, to stretch, to become that better version of yourself with confidence? Next slide. So this is where we help you to develop the skills to intervene, to recognize, respond, and refrain. So the first step, number 1, we need to recognize the panic cycle. Fear often follows a cycle. It starts with a trigger, it leads to physical symptoms, that leads to anxious thoughts, and then to avoidance. But understanding the cycle helps you to interrupt it. Step 2, we need to respond to the physical symptoms by bringing ourselves into a zone of comfort, of tolerance, by using grounding techniques. This will bring your focus back to the present moment to calm your mind and your body. And then thirdly, or step 3, we diffuse our anxious thoughts and reframe. Instead of fighting or believing the anxious thoughts, you learn to observe them without letting them control you and reframing your lens to a position of strength rather than insecurity. So all of these steps and tools will help you focus on what matters, delivering your message with pizzazz instead of getting stuck in anxious thoughts. So thought disruption strategies. Thought disruption techniques are strategies used to interrupt and redirect negative or unhelpful thought patterns. These are often thought through methods like mindfulness, cognitive reframing, or distraction to reduce their impact and promote more positive thinking. So on this slide, we have 3 different questions to ask yourself. Who would I be? Sorry, that's 4. I'm sorry. There's a little faux pas, and we'll get over that. Who would I be without the thought? Imagine how you'd feel or act if you didn't believe this anxious thought. By taking a moment to pause and asking yourself this question, you can create distance from the unhelpful thoughts and focus on the present moment. Next, ask yourself, what do I get from this? By reflecting on your anxious thought, are you giving yourself, what are you doing? Is it giving you a sense of protection or control? By asking yourself this, we can decipher whether this thought is actually helpful. Is this thought helping or hindering you? Next, by stating, I am having a thought that, before your anxious thought, helps to create distance and perspective. It reminds you that thoughts are just thoughts. They don't define reality. This is a simple technique you can use whenever you notice an anxious thought taking over. And then lastly, ask yourself, how realistic are my thoughts, beliefs, and expectations? Anxiety often stems from unrealistic or exaggerated beliefs, expectations we place on ourselves. So using evidence-based questioning to test your thoughts, such as, what's the worst that could happen? Where's the evidence that supports this thought? Or where's the evidence that refutes this thought? And how likely is it to happen? You're able to gain a better sense of control over the situation and clarity. Next slide.
So the single most effective way to treat public speaking anxiety is through exposure. And the reason for that is that fear diminishes with repeated or continuous exposure, which is a process referred to as habituation. So what we typically do with clients who are trying to build what we call an exposure plan, I'll share with you an example of this in a couple of slides. But what we want to help you do, first of all, is to brainstorm a list of public speaking situations, which we have on the left-hand side here where my cursor is. Then what we want to do is, once we've brainstormed a list of public speaking situations, is that we actually want to rank order these situations. So at the top of this pyramid here would be, for example, a situation that is highly anxiety provoking for you, whereas below it would be like a situation that is not quite as fearful for you. So for some people, it's really common, by the way, for people to say, like, you know what, I just don't have any, Amanda, I don't have any public speaking opportunities at work. I just don't have a lot. Sorry, I guess I can't do this one. And to those people, I will say that we can get really creative in helping you find public speaking opportunities if only you look for them. So again, along the left-hand side, even under this pyramid here, we have a number of examples for you to really think about, can I use any of these opportunities to practice with public speaking inside of work? So maybe you have an opportunity to offer to kick off the next department meeting that you're having, or maybe you can record a social media story. Maybe you can speak on a panel or on a podcast. Maybe you can lead a brainstorming exercise in class. There are so many different examples for where you can actually get public speaking opportunities. Maybe you can actually give a toast, let's say at a family event. Maybe even leaving a voicemail is anxiety provoking for you. So really just thinking across many different situations, not just at work. It could be even personal situations. So even telling a story to a group of your friends could be anxiety provoking for some people. So just thinking about, where are some opportunities that I can get with this? So besides actually getting the practice with the speaking situations, what we need to do is to actually analyze these public speaking situations and to actually form a bit of like a track record, a bit of a log, so that you can start to begin to look at, when were the times that I performed or spoke at my best, and why do I think that I showed up at my best in some of these situations? So there are specifically 2 questions that I want you to really start to ask yourself. And the two questions are, what went well and what would I do differently next time? So here is an example of an exposure plan, and I want to share a few points in relation to this. And firstly, on the left-hand side here, so that again, this is an example of one of these. On the left-hand side are the examples of the speaking or the vulnerability situations. So if you notice where my cursor is, the first one is sharing someone else's article on LinkedIn. And I'm guessing someone here is thinking, like, how does that have to do with public speaking if we're sharing an article on LinkedIn? The reason is because for a lot of people, sharing an article on LinkedIn requires being seen. And for a lot of us with public speaking, it is about being seen. And it's about the uncomfortable feelings that we have as a result of being seen. So the things that we talked about, such as embarrassment and disappointment, can also occur when we are also, for example, sharing someone else's post on LinkedIn. So the first thing, again, I wanted to share with you is I encourage you to think of other places besides even speaking where you could practice the skill of being seen. So that's the first thing here. Secondly, where my cursor is now is that we have anticipated levels of anxiety here. So again, we can see that sharing someone else's article on LinkedIn for this person is only a 1 out of 10, whereas doing an Instagram live where my cursor is now is an 8 to 9 out of 10. So what you're seeing here, though, is a good range. We want this distribution of like different kinds of speaking opportunities that some are more kind of create more anxiety than others. And then what we want is on the right-hand side here is really asking yourself these questions again. So what went well and what would I do differently next time? Because these two questions are so, so, so important. And the reason for that is because they form the basis of your toolkit. These questions tell you so much information as far as what are your non-negotiables when it comes to public speaking. What are the things that I'm doing or not doing that allow me to show up at my best? So that actually leads us perfectly into this next question. So once you have, again, you've brainstormed a list of speaking situations, you've gotten some practice with them, you have the exposure plan, you're starting to ask yourself these questions, those two questions. Then I want you to start to ask yourself this one, is based on all this data I have now, when do I show up at my best? So I have an example with myself as a case study up on this slide. So when I have done this myself and I've collected all this data to ask myself, when do I show up at my best? I can easily, like I honestly probably created these bullets within 5 minutes because I just know so much about myself now about when I show up at my best. For example, and again, a lot of these were things, even in leading to today's webinar, were things that I did. So, doing a vocal warm-up, for example. So I can actually share maybe later on an example of a vocal warm-up that I really like. Getting there early, having some loose speaking notes, feeling really good about my opening, the first 2 minutes specifically. Having meditated the morning before, being able to answer the question, what am I there to do? Having some good sleep and rest the week before, or even, for example, this morning, I blocked off my whole calendar this morning. Getting off of technology right before is low-hanging fruit as well. So, and practicing aloud, of course. And I have practiced aloud X times because for every person, the X is going to be a little bit different. And then also what's important is to also ask yourself the question, when have I been off my game? So what are my reasons for when I look at why do I think I was off my game? So here are some examples for me. So last minute changes to slides. My opening is too formal, too rigid. I'm in a big hurry. I'm on my phone right before. I try to skip my practice. Let's say I got lazy with practicing. Let's say I'm feeling fatigued and overworked in my life in general. These are all good examples of this. So again, if you're someone who wants to try this yourself, just write on my game on the left-hand side of the page, put a little line, write down off my game on the right-hand side of the page, and even just start to ask yourself the question, like when you think about some of those times that you've engaged in public speaking, when did I show up at my best? So we also want to help you create your own toolkit. So here is a performance triangle. And it's also called a mental blueprint from the book called Perform Under Pressure by Dr. Carrie Evans. And so there's 3 points to this triangle I want to share with you. And so the first one is around mindset. So it's important to also think about tools and different things that you can do to really help you cultivate a really positive mindset going into public speaking that really challenges your perspective. So even things that Megan talked about today. So for example, she said, is this performance energy or is this performance anxiety? So systems are really important as well. So like really asking yourself, if I could create a bit of a checklist of things that I need to do in the week leading up to an effective public speaking presentation, what would they be? So for me, it's even things like making sure that I've exercised every day the week before, meditating, having lots of water, no coffee, no caffeine. So there's little things like that as part of your strategy. And then finally, your skill set. So in looking at what are some of the actual things that I can do that will actually enhance my communication? So I mentioned vocal warm-ups earlier, anticipating questions could be another one. So really, even practicing, these are all examples of things that you can actually do to actually improve your skill set while speaking. So just due to, I think, lack of time here, I'm going to move past this one, but we have 3 of our favorite exercises. We do share these on our LinkedIns and on our Instagram as well, which you guys are welcome to follow. But if you want to learn about these 3 strategies, we have these also pinned on our LinkedIn, so you can learn more about them. So finally, writing your own recipe card, I think, is another way to formulate a toolkit. So I actually want to share with you, and actually Jonathan said he'll share this template to the group later, but this is one that I created for myself for today. So I have a toolkit of things that I wanted to do to help me be able to manage the pressure with speaking. And so these are all examples of things that you can actually include on a toolkit. So Jonathan has a blank template like this that he will make sure to circulate later for this audience. So again, that's the empty template here. So some key takeaways from today's session is that public speaking anxiety is a product of a culture that is obsessed with performance and a human brain that cares a lot about what other people think. Secondly, self-awareness is a gateway to behavior change, which is why we wanted to share with you the common causes, the 5 public speaking dimensions, so that you can start to observe without judgment what you're noticing in your body. Thirdly, it's important to have, a good exposure plan and a solid toolkit, and to be able to answer the question of when do I show up at my best. Maybe also create your own speaking recipe card, again, as a result of today's session. And then for organizations and leaders, we play a huge role in helping people manage their public speaking anxiety. I want you to check on your teams. I want you to share a resource or a top takeaway from today's session. And finally, we do have a public speaking group for anyone here who is interested. Just send us an email for a free consultation. And we do have evening and daytime groups both available. Some books and podcasts for anyone else who wants to kind of gain more resources and to be able to read further into this. So some of my favorite books here would be Think Faster, Talk Smarter, Find Your Voice, Pressure to Perform. And then I've done some podcasts recently as well that you're welcome to check out. Again, a lot of these are typically on our website, on my LinkedIn and Instagram for anyone who's interested. And I know we didn't have a lot of time for questions, but that's because we wanted to share so much information with you. So we just want to thank you all for being such an engaged group today. And as always, just being so active in the chat box with us. If you have any additional questions following the webinar today, feel free again to reach out to us on socials or to send us an email. And thank you again to everyone and for EHN Canada for having us back for a second time.
Thanks so much, everybody. Have a fantastic day, and we'll see you next time.